Hi, listeners. We've got a fantastic show today with a woman by the name of Jen Satterly. I'm not going to give her a big intro because she does such a much better job of it herself. There are things I have to preface this one with. There are things that she said, the way that she used words, the way that she explained things that we all know about PTS and things like that. But the way she delivered the message was unique. And coming from me, someone who's interviewed and had conversations with so many people, that meant a lot to me. So I highly encourage you to listen to this one all the way to the end. Thanks for joining us.
I wanna try and take in all the highs, embrace them for more than a moment's time. I want you, please don't move when I push you away. I know I contradict myself some days, but will you ride the lows with me?
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I am your host, Kristen Sunanta Walker. Our goal is to help discussions about mental health be a regular part of your daily life, no different than discussions about physical health. Mental illness can be a topic of discussion under the umbrella of mental health, along with so many other topics. This show is the original program on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com. Our network of shows are played in over 180 countries and cover more topics under that umbrella than you can possibly imagine. We were talking about mental health long before it became cool and popular to talk about, and thank goodness it has become so popular. We have incredible guests, advocates, patients, experts, people. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy our intro music, a song named Lows, written by Aubrey Toon. You can find her music at www.aubreytoone.com.
That night when I started praying, I cried. Will you ride the lows with me? Will you ride the lows with me? When I'm down, my vision gets blurry.
Hi, Jen. Thank you so much for coming on Mental Health News Radio.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
So I, at 38, decided that I was going to take a total left turn in my life. And I had spent my career up until that point in time in advertising and marketing, film and photography. And at that time, I was contracted to start working with special forces. And I didn't want to initially because I knew nothing about it, but jumped in and started filming their realistic military training exercises. So these really big military exercises where they practice what they're going to do overseas. And I spent about 4 years embedding with Navy SEALs and Green Berets and Army Rangers. And really during that time developed a passion to help our soldiers come back home. And so while I was part of the team training for overseas at that point in time, at about 3.5 years in, I thought, you know what? Our soldiers are struggling. Our families are struggling. I want to be part of the solution back here at home to help our soldiers deal with the trauma overseas.
Were you in the military yourself?
Not at all. I literally swung the pendulum from the art world all the way over to the military world. So about as far as I could go from one side to the other. And my dad served, but he was Air Force and out before I was even born. So I had very limited experience with military prior to working with them.
Ah, okay. Well, that's amazing. I mean, that in itself, because the military are notoriously very, careful or very, they only go from their people in service to do contract work and whatever. So that must have been a meant to be thing that you were welcomed into it.
Absolutely. It was one of those things that, I questioned initially, like, why am I here? This is not, I found it fascinating. Part of my personality type is I love research. I love history. I was an anthropology major. And so different groups, different sort of tribes has always been a passion of mine. So really initially, I approached this group with more curiosity. and who are you and what makes you tick and what's going on behind the scenes. And what I saw behind the scenes, I couldn't turn away from anymore
Yeah.
once I truly learned the devastation of our soldiers back at home. And that was one of those things where I thought, you know what? I don't know how to start a nonprofit. I've never done a nonprofit, but it's time to start one.
Yeah, it's definitely, a journey. And I was thinking about, what you said about tribes. I mean, the military are tribes within a tribe within a tribe, because you definitely have Navy, that's their own tribe, and then Army, and then Marines. But then you figure out a way to, coalesce those as you're working with those tribes.
Yes, you're right. There's tribes within tribes within tribes in any culture, in any society, really.
Yep. Well, that degree, anthropology, helped a lot. So and then you fell in love with your husband,
Yes.
and is he active still, or
He
is
is
he?
not. So he
Okay.
retired 10 years ago in December. And when I met Tom, he had been retired for 3 years, but Tom had spent 25 years in the Army. 20 of those years was in a special operations unit called Delta Force, which is a very secretive elite unit that does counterterrorism, hostage rescue, and they move in really small teams. So he had very, very severe complex post traumatic stress disorder.
Mm.
Although when we met, he didn't even know he had it, which seems odd at the time.
I hear that so much. I mean, I've told you before we did this show, we have our first responder mental health network, and I hear that so often. And I know, because I've heard from other people, and then in reading on your website and everything, how that happens. It's part of what's needs to be changed about the military and the first responders, and the stress that that they're under with what it is they do. The whole, it's a little bit, it's not handled the same way, but a lot of it is modeled after the British stiff upper lip about
Yeah.
everything.
Yes. Yeah. Tom and I, what we do now, and part of what we do with the foundation, is we do what we call resiliency training. We like to term things that feel a little bit more familiar. And I do think that language is a huge part of what we are battling, what we are understanding, creating awareness around. And so even post-traumatic stress disorder, that's not a really favorable term in
Right.
the military or law enforcement. Nobody wants to raise their hand saying, yep, I've got that. I've got a mental disorder. I'm supposed to be tough. I'm supposed to rub dirt on it. Boys don't cry. Everything you want to throw in there that sort of creates this mindset that it's weak, and asking for
Right.
help is weakness, when in fact it's truly a sign of strength and courage. And that's what we go around and we talk about, and we share our story, and encourage others to do the same. There is a power to naming it.
Oh, absolutely. I think what I've heard from other people in the military are that some of the thought process was, we don't want to shine a light on those kinds of things, because once you open that can of worms, and they've learned that's not a healthy way to look at that.
Yeah, it's kind of along the lines, and I hear this a lot of, a lot of people will say, how do you talk to teens about suicide? And as a parent, it's one of those things that's so frightening, but so necessary. And I've actually heard parents say, like, well, I don't want to talk about suicide because that might plant an idea.
Right.
It's kind of the same mindset here. Like, I don't want to talk about PTS. I don't want to name it, because then I don't have to deal with it. I don't have to look at that demon. Or even if, and a lot of people have this idea of PTSD of the veteran under the bridge, or somebody who's going to go into the post office and shoot it up, because
Right.
media has really created this idea that's actually very false about PTSD. And in fact, it doesn't belong just to the military or law enforcement community. I had PTSD, complex PTSD from childhood abuse and trauma, from my sexual assault. And so even though Tom's story of his post-traumatic stress and my story of post-traumatic stress were very, very different, how we felt was very similar.
Yeah, there's a commonality amongst people that suffer from PTS, and also people that have, been in some sort of sexual or physical or psychological trauma at the hands of another person. There is a common theme there. Our bodies react. I mean, our bodies are a biology. They react in the same, in the same way, from a physical level, or a lot the same way. So, and emotions too. It's the same emotions that get pulled out when these things are going on in our lives. So I always think, thank goodness we have this education now around these things, because the idea in the past, as you know, has been, don't talk about it. We don't want to, like you said, with the suicide, I've heard that so much, don't plant an idea. But so what do? Just keep these people and treat them like robots. And then
Right.
one day they're going to crack, most likely, and maybe not make it. Instead of, let's do preemptive work so that they have all these tools to handle the stress that they're going to be under, and so on and so on, and healthier ways to handle it, so that they don't go off to downward spiral later in life.
It's so true. And with post-traumatic stress disorder, our organization's, even part of what we're doing is our initiative is changing the language to occupational stress injury. Mm-hmm. So that's something that they're doing in Canada already. Again, because we know that labels and what they do. And when you've got an entire society of people that need healing, and really to not just, because people will look at the suicide number and say 22 veterans and active duty members are committing suicide every day. During COVID, that number has risen to 28.
Right.
And it's so alarming. But what people aren't looking at as well is the impact that has on their tribe. So their spouse, their children. And, we speak to generals' wives. We talk to people who have had a spouse in the military for 20, 25, 30 years. And when we're talking to these families, most of the spouses have never even heard of secondary PTS. They have no idea that's even a thing. So not only is it powerful to help the active duty or veteran soldier identify, okay, it's biology, it's not your fault. Mm-hmm. The more you try to shove this down and shove it under the rug, the worse it's going to get. The more you face it, the better and quicker you're going to heal. And that goes for every member in the family. And it's not a life sentence. PTS is something that, let's say you're in a car accident, you might have 6 months of symptoms after that. Complex PTS might be something like our law enforcement or military members who have to see trauma over and over again. It might take a little bit longer to heal from, but right. There is a way to the other side of it.
Absolutely. And I like the fact that whenever I speak to someone who is in the military, was in the military, or works with the military, everyone uses the acronym PTS. They don't tend to use the PTSD. And I love that, because there's stigma around the word disorder, and I can understand why.
Yeah. And especially, when you look at the culture of military specifically, it's a very macho culture.
Right.
A lot of what is needed to do the job that is required of them is not only a high level of intensity of, shooting and training and close quarter battle and all of these things that's required to do what they have to do, but nobody's really talking to our soldiers about moral injury or about the mental health effects of taking another life or seeing another life lost.
Right.
And so we're just starting to have those discussions, and people will say, oh yeah, but look at the veterans that came back from World War II. They didn't have these kind of issues. And it's no, absolutely they did. Yeah. It was called shell shock.
Right.
And that generation truly was told to shove it under the rug. And there were a lot of suicides that were attributed to other things. They just didn't label it that way back
Absolutely. Then. Alcohol abuse, yep. Domestic violence. I mean, yes. So many things came out of that because they weren't helped.
Yep. Right.
Yeah. I mean, boot camp can cause PTS. Yes. I mean, my son, he chose the Marines to have the, the hardest boot camp. And I mean, dropped him off at 184 pounds and he came back 145 pounds, had pneumonia several times. They actually changed the way that they do a boot camp at Camp Lejeune because of the things that went on during his particular unit. And, someone died. They were making them put a little piece of ketchup after running all day on a seed on a bun, and that's all you get to eat. I mean, just all kinds of stuff that now, of course, that would never happen. Well, I will never say never, but those kinds of things. Everybody in the unit got pneumonia. It's like, yeah, that's not really a healthy way to.
No, it's not. And really, what we talk about is health, and so much of, it's a generational thing. Tom and I know, in fact, we went and spoke in Utah on Wednesday, and we were speaking to the 19th Special Forces Group, and we're seeing so much progress just in the fact that we're in the room. When a year or 2 years ago, we wouldn't be in the room talking about, hey, this is what it is. This is what it might look like. This is what you should do about it if you're feeling any of these things. Every single time we speak. And these are, it was a leadership forum. So these are high level leaders in this room. And every single time we leave, we have at least a few guys that can't talk and their eyes get really teary. And we're like, that's all right. Here's our card. Because it's so emotional and powerful to understand this is a biological effect. And there's no amount of willpower or strength or whatever you want to label it that you need to get power through this.
Yeah.
And honestly, we say, like, listen, if you broke your arm, right, you would see a doctor, you would go
right.
You would get a cast, and then you would do therapy.
You wouldn't ignore it and just try to power through it, because that means that you'll never have a healed arm.
Right. And honestly, you're a stronger warfighter.
Yep.
You're stronger anything when you have mental health that's in check. So we talk about that all the time. People are like, well, I don't know if I want to talk to a therapist. Is that going to make me weak? No, it's going to make you better.
Hey, listeners, a quick but important notice for all the shows that we'll be doing for our first responders. In 2018, the number of police officers, firefighters, EMTs, and veterans, anyone who's considered a first responder, who died of suicide was greater than the combined total killed in the line of duty. More attention is being paid, but help is often elusive. Even with more available resources, those who are first in line to help us actually asking for help for themselves, that can be the hardest thing for them to do. Mental Health News Radio Network is working with Stepstone Connect to give voice to our incredible first responders. Stepstone Connect is an organization born of the belief that accessibility and confidentiality will eliminate traditional barriers to treatment. Privacy and the peace of mind that comes with it, combined with easy, everywhere access, underlines Stepstone's mission and treatment philosophy. It's simple. With access to the internet and a device with a camera, you're a click away from leading mental health clinicians who specialize in the treatment of PTSD and other trauma-related injuries for first responders and their families. If you or someone you care about is struggling, please don't let another day pass before discovering what Stepstone can do. Stronger connections, everywhere access, stepstoneconnect.com. You can find out more by going to their website, stepstoneconnect.com, or call 800-495-3761. Now back to the show.
Tom and I talk about that all the time. Do you want to go into combat with someone who is on 16 different types of pills, who's medicating with alcohol or drugs?
Yeah.
Who's going through another divorce back home, who maybe is dealing with an issue with a kid because they're never home and around, and now the child's acting out, and they're not dealing with any of that? Or do you want the guy who's dealing with all of that, is at a really good place where he can focus overseas and do the job he needs to do? Which one are you going to pick? And everyone picks the second guy.
That is so great that you say that, because I was just going to ask you a question to see if that was going to be, not to see if that was going to be your answer, but just to see if that, could come up. And not one person, and nothing against anyone else, but that I've interviewed that works with the military has actually said that, because it's so true. It's the weakness which is not their fault because it's, talking about these things and doing what you do is new. So but it is more of a weakness, more of a hindrance, more of a life and death situation if you aren't with someone that's getting the help.
Right. Tom talked about when he was and honestly, Delta Force is one of the highest trained units in the world. And, they really are something very special. But, that unit has so much trauma and untreated trauma. And Tom himself had so much untreated trauma. The movie Black Hawk Down was based on Tom's very first combat mission was what they made a movie about. So
Wow.
he was 26 years old and he really resigned himself to die that night. He thought he was dead. He came to peace with it. He talked about the peace that he came with. But, for him, he was like, listen, I saw a 13-year-old kill one of the Delta Force guys that was older and even more highly trained than me.
Wow.
He goes, but nobody talks to you about when a 13-year-old girl has an AK and kills your best friend,
Yeah.
And you go back and you train again and you get back to work again and nobody's talking, hey, the biology of what just happened, let's address that so that you can continue to do your job and you can continue to focus and keep yourself alive and keep others alive. But, the discussion starting, I'm so excited about that. I really do have a lot of hope on what we're seeing with a lot of the leaders that are coming up.
And it's never ending. I mean, just to be from a purely business perspective about something, it's never ending resources, financial aid, continued work to actually deal with these things as they're going on than it is to avoid them. It's more cost effective. And it also employs a ton of people and puts people to work to actually come in and focus on this stuff than it is to ignore it.
I agree. And, we have a story of SEAL that we did a podcast with actually was sharing his story. And he said, listen, I love to deploy. I was the deployed guy. I had done a few tours and my wife left me. I had a 3 and 4-year-old. I asked the commander, hey, I need to sit this rotation out. I'm good to go after, but I really need to be with my 3 and 4-year-old right now and sort out this divorce. And they let him sit a rotation out, but he was punished,
Of course.
Job and really just made it so hard on him that he quit. And we talk about this when we speak to groups too, because obviously we have a heart for those that serve. And Tom and I love them. But also, if you look at the business of retention, if it costs $2 million to train a SEAL, it would make a whole lot more sense to let him sit out a rotation.
Yeah.
For 6 months, let him still work and do what he needs to do, and then go back on the next rotation instead of another $2 million in training to bring somebody else in to take his place. That's a new team member. And not to mention that there were also suicides in that group because everyone saw that guy reached out for help. He was punished. I can't reach out for help. And they lost.
Exactly.
So it's not good business either.
Exactly. Now, the date may have been pushed because I know how it is in publishing, but the date I have is that Arsenal of Hope, which is your new book, was released yesterday.
Yes, well, so it did get pushed, but the official date was February 16th, and then it changed to the 23rd.
I'm excited for you. So I know because I've read your site, but for the listeners to know, how many books have you written?
This is my very first book.
Woo!
Yay!
How was that process? Because that can be stressful.
Real stressful. And honestly, it was really funny because Tom wrote a book called All Secure, and it was about his time in Delta Force, but really it was about what war did to him, how it affected him, how it affected his relationships. He nearly took his life in 2013, and then kind of how he built his life back up after that. My book, and so I kind of had already gone through that process very intimately with Tom when he was writing his book. So the process wasn't entirely unfamiliar, but putting my stuff down on paper, it's a lot of what Tom and I went through. It's a lot of our dirty laundry. That caused a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of anxiety. But I wrote the book I wish I would have had 7 years ago when I met Tom. That's
Yeah.
truly what I try to write was, what did Jen need back then?
And that's what you do when you're an advocate, which it's, there's some people, then that's okay, that don't want to go anywhere near that kind of service to others. And there's some people that do. And when you write a book and you're talking about painful things that you've experienced, I mean, it's not like you were writing a book about, how you climbed this mountain and went ziplining. This is
Right.
serious, deep, hard stuff. It's hard to visit. You have to be in a healthier mental health place in order to excavate all of that again, and the power of putting it to words.
I had to do so much work before I could
I
write
bet.
the book.
You're
I
like, is my therapist on speed dial?
she's talked about a lot in my book. In fact, I loved her so much. Tom and I used her personally that we hired her at All Secure Foundation as our therapist for
Nice.
the foundation because she's so profound and powerful. And the work she had me do was deeply painful, and all the hard stuff I had been doing over the last few years. So that by the time I got to Arsenal of Hope, Simon and Schuster are like, "Yep, okay, we're good to go. We want it finished in 4 months." And my
Whew.
literary agent said, "I've never done a book in under 8 months," and he's been doing this for 30 years. And I'm like, all right, let's go. His wife is a collaborative writer, Holly Lawrence, and she helped Tom with his book as well. And I had written so much that I just kind of started handing her stuff, and she helped organize it and beautifully helped me reword some things. And without Holly, it wouldn't have happened in 4 months.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it's amazing. People don't always understand this, but when you get a really good editor that is also highly empathic, um, their changes and requests and maybe suggestions don't hit you in the gut hard because of the way they know how to deliver the information. It's not like, oh, I'm horrible, they're attacking my work,
Yes.
blah, blah, blah. You're like, oh, thank you. It's like you said, it's this collaborative, cathartic process, and it takes skill to be that kind of an editor.
Oh, yeah. I mean, she's phenomenal. And really, we kind of joke that we were strangers when we met and we're sisters now. It's just, it was, I had to be really vulnerable with her too. There were parts in the book that I'm like, should I leave this in? And she's like, yeah, you should. I mean, it was good to have that sounding board of, it's going to take a little bravery to put this down, but this
Right.
is important. I'm like, you're right. Let's do it. So she was also kind of a coach through this as well.
Well, let's talk about what your nonprofit does. I know you go out and speak, but give us an idea of just the all encompassing idea of what it is that you do.
Sure. So, All Secure Foundation, we are moving into our fourth year. And really, what we started out was a resource library because when I was embedding with SEALs, Green Berets, it didn't matter what group I was with, the problem set was the same. Also, nobody was talking. So, I would leave it right after a deployment. I might have somebody call and say, hey, this just happened on a trip. And I'd say, okay, read this book, check out this resource, here's some things that you should try or do based on what Tom and I have done and has worked for him. And then those calls started coming in where, I was on the phone 11, 12 hours a day
Mm.
from one group to the next. And so I'm like, we have got to start a nonprofit. People need resources. People need the knowledge. They need the awareness. And then we started doing couples retreats. So these are really intensive 4-day out in nature. You're doing really cool things like hiking and waterfall rides and all this cool stuff. But our therapist, Stacy Stone, is there, and everything has meaning and everything is sort of an exercise. It's kind of hiding the peas and the brownies. You're having a whole lot of fun.
Yeah.
But you're also getting a lot of tools. You're opening a lot of doors of communication that maybe have been closed for the last 20 years. And then additionally, we go around the country. We speak at different military bases and posts about PTS resiliency.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So how has I always have to ask this of people that do what you do, where you do in-person things. How has COVID impacted what you do?
Oh, it's terrible. It's so funny because this morning, um, I was talking to Tom about it, and I'm like, I'm just exhausted. I'm tired of the fight sometimes. And to the listeners out there who are feeling that way too, I feel like over the last week alone, we've had so many phone calls of people just saying, I'm tired.
Yeah.
Because it's constant pivoting, right? And that's what we've had to do as our organization. We had 8 retreats scheduled. They were all canceled.
Yeah.
We keep kicking the ball. Yesterday, I just had to renegotiate all of my contracts for 2022
Yeah.
because, of the situation we're in. But during that time, we created an online course that's launching probably in about another month. And we're really excited about that. So the work that we're doing in those workshop retreats, we're bringing that to an online course. And we still do coaching calls, therapy calls. And so really this past year, we have served more people and helped more people because we just really, like I told Tom, I said, put that Delta Force hat on. Let's figure this out. How can we continue to serve? How can we continue to help? And Tom and I have had COVID. We had it in November. And so
Of last year or the year before?
it's funny because we think we had it before that too, because we were on a
Yeah.
military post it was last February, and we both got really, 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 really sick.
Yeah.
And we were really sick for about 4 weeks, and it was the Italian Green Berets that were over
Right.
in that group. So I think we might have had it twice. I'm not sure, but
You can.
this last November. And so,
How was the second round?
Tom had it for like a day and a half. He
Yeah.
seriously was, chills, all that kind of stuff, and he was better. He's a blood type O. I'm a blood type A, and so I do have a little bit of a weaker immune system. For me, it was about 2 weeks, and I had all the symptoms.
Right. And you're like,
all of them.
If you whistle through the house because you're done with this, well, I feel like I'm going to die. I will find a way to kick you.
Oh my gosh, I know. But it's been a challenge for so many people, and really, there's a chapter in my book about COVID and the amount of stress and trauma that it has brought upon us all.
We finally stopped. We had created a special page on our network site for, this was like in March or something, or April of last year, for all the shows where anyone even mentions COVID. And finally by November, I was like, just don't tag, because now it's 100,000 feet long, and we're going to be talking about this for the next 50 years.
Like, enough with the hashtag COVID. It's hashtag over it,
Right. Exactly. I know my ex-husband had it in December of 2019, and so I was like, he had every symptom and thought he was going to die, and we didn't know what the heck it was because people didn't start talking about it until. So I was just like, you had it already.
Yep.
But
it's been a challenging time, and really we've seen an intense rise in PTS symptoms. Because it's stacking the sandwich. It's how many more things can you put on that sandwich before you got to take a bite.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I just had a call with our first responder podcasters before I got on with you. It just worked out that way, and they all said the same thing. And I've been hearing this from other guests that have come on shows. A lot of people just pushed through 2020 with everything, social unrest, political stuff, COVID. I mean, there was so much stuff that they all were like, we just got to hang on till the new year. no, whoever gets in politically, I won't even go there, but even whatever side you were on, they were like, we just got to get through this year. But you know what, how it happens, and this from the work that you do, where someone has been moderately healthy physically their whole career, and then they decide to retire, and all of a sudden every illness they've ever
Yeah.
that's what it's been like for people with their mental health. Like, they just hung in there, felt awful, had mental health challenges, but they really didn't start to feel the weight of those challenges until the new year.
Right. Yeah. And it's one of those things that we hear it a lot is I'm in my head too much.
Yeah.
And really during this quarantine and isolation, I am grateful that, Tom and I get along really well. We already work together,
Right.
We're already like, we already do this. We already live together, work together, travel together. We have teenagers and they're very, very, very self-reliant and they're great kids. So again, I'm very lucky. But so many of the people that we talk to are alone.
Yeah.
And they're like, listen, it's me and my dog, or just me. I'm like, get a dog. Because
Oh, don't even get me started on that conversation. Yeah.
yes, because I told Tom, I said, I wouldn't want to be alone with my thoughts, for a month at a time. It's truly what the prison system does or did
Yeah.
as a form of punishment, as solitary confinement. So humans just aren't built for it. We're not built for isolation.
Oh, absolutely. It's all the years that I did therapy dog work where I had to fight to get people to take it seriously in the mental health field. And, because it was way before it became so popular. But, now they're like, because of all this isolation, they're like, wow, I would have never made it through. I never realized how important my dog or my
Yes.
cat or, my horse or whatever has meant to me. And I'm like, that's what I was trying to tell everybody 4 years ago.
Right. Yeah, it is. I mean, companionship, connection, it's biologically how we're structured.
Yeah, dogs don't get depressed about COVID. They don't even know
No.
what the heck it is. They're just the dogs. So you have that regular reminder every moment of the day that you're around them, that, oh, that's right, there is another way to look at life.
Yes. Yes. Let's go for a walk.
Yeah.
Let's get out there. And that's been so important too, is if you can find, I know it's not easy for everyone all the time, but just being out in nature,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
so healing. And Tom and I spend a lot of time this summer getting in our Jeep, taking the top down. We live in St. Louis, but we're kind of further south, so we could get to kind of Ozark mountainy area
Oh,
within an hour.
nice.
So we would drive around in our Jeep sometimes for 3 or 4 hours on a
I know.
Saturday. Like, all right, let's go down to Southern Missouri.
Yep.
But we always felt better when we got back. We're like, oh, okay, wind in
So,
the hair.
yeah, sometimes just getting out of the house.
Yes.
And we did the same thing. We just piled the dogs in the car and we just, drove around, found a dog park that no one was at and said, run, run, run. I know you can do that in the yard, but you're going to do it here. And just being out, I'd walk back in the house and go, I am in such a good mood.
Yes. Yes. Sometimes it's just the small things. People, you know, I think self care went into a place of getting a bad rap because, I think especially with
Absolutely.
women when they're like, you need to be self care, consider yourself as far as your mental health in your daily routine. And people are like, yeah, right. I've got kids, I've got dogs, I've got work, I'm homeschooling. Like, but I keep saying, like, no, you don't need to go to the spa, or you're thinking these really big things as far as self care. For me, it looks like getting up at 6 a.m. an hour early before anyone else in the house. So I have that hour just to myself, whatever I want to do in that hour. Sometimes I hit snooze. Sometimes I go make coffee and hang out with the dogs and read a book. I'm just giving myself that time, and I had to carve it and make it. I'm like, it wasn't given to me. It was okay. I like to get up at 7, but I'm going to get up at 6 because
Yeah.
I feel better throughout the day when I've given myself that pause.
I don't even remember. I was saying this yesterday is as we gleefully left to go to the grocery store, I looked at my husband and I said, Isn't this funny? Like the only place that we've been for a year has been the grocery store. And we're so excited. Like if we can't go because it's thunder, we're like, oh man, who would have thought Food Lion and Publix were just the most awesome places to go?
Yeah, not since I had toddlers. One that was like the excitement on getting out was with babies. I'm like, okay, you watch the kids. I'm going to the grocery store. I remember nearly crying. Like,
Yes.
I've got 5 minutes to myself
Oh yeah, yeah.
at the grocery store. Nobody's throwing up on me or pooping right now.
Exactly. I've had some moments where my dogs are, I'm with them all day and they're in bed with me all night. And so I get to a point like I did with my son when he was little, where I'm like, I need my body to just be not touched, not licked, not all those things that you want to do. Just please go outside for an hour. I need just, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I felt this. Oh, right. When I had a little child.
Yes.
Although my son wasn't licking me, but you know what I mean?
Who knows? Who knows what they do when they're
Exactly. Some goo that they picked up off the ground and go, mommy, take a bite. And you're so tired to just go, okay. And then you go, oh, I don't want to know what that was.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That kind of tired nobody prepares you for. Truly.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you can prepare for that kind of tired.
Well, tell our listeners, Jen, where they can find out more about you and your organization.
Yeah, so allsecurefoundation.org is a great place to go, get more information about the work we do, our books. 100% of everything that's purchased on our store at All Secure Foundation goes 100% right back into programs and warriors. So we have a very generous donor who covers all of our admin. So we're very blessed in that way. 100% of every dollar that comes in goes right back to our warriors. So that's a great place to find us. And it says we do special operations, but we've never turned anyone away. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Fantastic. I'm so honored to know your stories, both you and your husband's, and to have you on the show. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
And listeners, thank you for tuning in to our First Responder Mental Health podcast on Mental Health News Radio.
But will you ride the low, low, lows with me? Will you ride the low, low, lows with me?
One thing you can always count on at Mental Health News Radio Network and my show is that there will always be dogs around. Why? They are natural healers, excellent for your mental health. The original therapy dog Miles has something to say in just a moment. For now, please check out all of our amazing shows at mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com and all your favorite podcast apps. Until next time, I'm Kristen Sananta Walker, and thank you for listening.
And I can ride the low, low, lows with me. I can ride the low, low, lows with me. Till my vision clears up perfectly. I can ride the low, low, lows with me.
Good boy.